Hello and warm welcome to Media Week. I'm Ingrid Willinge. Ahead on the program, Presto enters a deal with rival QuickFlix to offer its streaming content. Plus, Nine Network says goodbye to its current programming deal with Warner Brothers as it eyes more TV sports rights. I'm joined by my co-host James Manning, editor and publisher of Media Week. First up though, it's exactly 1 year since John Hartigan was appointed chairman of Prime Media Group, taking over from the late Paul Ramsey, who was the founder of the business. Mr Hartigan had been broadly out of the media spotlight for a couple of years prior, since departing from News Corp Australia, where he was, of course, chief executive and chairman. Lately, he's been busy advocating an overhaul of Australia's media ownership laws, and he joins us in the studio today. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you've really been pressing the case for deregulation and particularly of the regional market. What are you calling for from the federal government?
Well, we don't want two types of Australia. We don't want second-class citizens in the bush as opposed to the people more fortunate in the cities. So what we want is a level playing field, and we don't believe that regional television is getting that currently. So we want the affiliation rules were set up in the late 80s. They still operate the same today. In the meantime, we have a borderless media environment in Australia. We have broadband competitors coming into our regulated areas. We pay government for exclusivity in those regions. We have obligations such as news and community service announcements, and yet these competitors come in without any of those obligations. And we think that's unfair. We like competition, but we can't compete with one hand behind our back.
John, there's some different views amongst some of the media owners, so they've all got slightly, well, not all of them, there's some different takes on them, but it's clear what you point out. So the old laws which were there to protect you no longer do, they hinder you. The regional media interest, I mean, what's your take on, will there be a change, do you think? I mean, you've dealt with a lot of communications ministers over the year, a lot of prime ministers.
Sure.
Where do you think this will go?
Look, I'm not sure. I think one thing that needs to be understood, James, is that if you asked all media or any industry to come together in a common position, that's simply not going to happen. And if it does, it's going to reek of collusion, and the ACCC should come down on you. In this case, regional Australia is joined at the hip. The three regional operators, Southern Cross, Win and Prime, all understand that their audiences are being treated by mugs, as mugs, and that they're not being able to compete. All the other issues related to metropolitan television and subscription television, they're separate issues. But the one that's important, I think, to Australia and this national debate is regional Australia, and that's what I'm standing up for.
Were you recently part of a group that met with Prime Minister Tony Abbott on this?
Correct.
What was his sort of reaction to you, and what do you think are chances of getting these laws across the line?
I think two things, Ingrid. One, it was very generous. We asked for a separate meeting to the Metropolitans, and he granted us that. And it was very important for us to put the position of regional television broadcasters to him. So he understood that we're not just dealing with one country. We're dealing with audiences in the country who are being treated as second-class citizens, as I said before. And ultimately, it's going to mean the loss of jobs. It's certainly going to mean that they get inferior quality news and information, which lessens their ability to participate in any national debate.
You alluded before that some people were expecting you to maybe collude, if you like, and present a united front.
Yeah.
But the media is a special case, though, isn't it? And you no doubt understand how politicians find it tricky to deal with. They're worried about votes. They're worried about media turning on them, if you like. So is there an impetus that the media should be maybe a bit more united?
I don't think so, no. I think that...
Do you think they should just do their jobs?
Look, we had our communications minister was recently speaking about how courageous he was in getting legislation through the House. Well, hello, here is a perfect opportunity to stand up for the downtrodden people. And, you know, one thing about mines, it's another thing about water rights, but the third thing that country people are seriously aggrieved about is their lack of ability to deal with a quality news service, which is ultimately the basis of any country.
Yeah.
Do you think the political power play that we've been hearing so much about between Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull this year has sort of stopped anything from getting through?
There is no doubt that it's not simply with this government, but media policy, there's always overreach from the Prime Minister. You know, that's a fact of life. But the reality is there's only one person that is ultimately the authority for their portfolio, and that's, in this case, Malcolm Turnbull.
So it was a pretty exciting time in the media space you found yourself back in. How are you finding the return to the sector after a few years out of it?
It's interesting. You know, it's part of your DNA. You just become, even though you're sitting in the grandstand, you still feel that you're contributing as part of it. Look, I love it. It's rich. It's far more complex than when I left, and there's nothing worse than having some person who's no longer intimately involved in cheerleading from the grandstand. That simply you won't find me doing that. But I think it's still a wonderful industry and wonderful opportunity for young people who have entrepreneurial skills, and ultimately one thing, and that's the ability to want to find out what's happening in their communities. And that's what at Prime our people do.
What's the free TV membership like, and how do you think Harold Mitchell's doing in terms of... He's sort of gone pretty hard for the sector these days.
Yeah, look, Harold's Harold. I think, with due respect, that he aims up more for metropolitan television, and they're bigger, and that's understandable. But I think he needs to spend a little more time focusing on the regions, and I think currently you're seeing Win and the Nine Network looking at their affiliation agreement. If some of the things come to pass that we've read over the last few days, where their affiliation fees may increase by up to $43 million, I mean, this is going to be the litmus test. You're going to see that the voices in the cities are going to be muted, and that's going to happen because they're going to close down news services.
I think you've got a longer-term affiliation deal with Seven. I think they signed quite a lengthy one, didn't they?
We did. We signed until 2019.
All right. So there's no sort of surprising rate rises around the corner for you there?
Well, you never know. But
factored into it.
But they're great.
The other might go up, you do too? Or?
But they're great partners, and they, you know, as Supreme, their management team, the best programmers, and I have nothing but admiration for them. They're good partners.
In terms of Prime Media Group, it's in its 50th year, so it's a big sort of anniversary for the group. What do you think it says about regional Australia and what it does for regional Australia as well?
Well, I spent last week in Tamworth, where we celebrated the New England Signal 50 years, and I went to Albury late last year, and again they celebrated 50. The relationship between our news teams and our whole audience is quite amazing. To see the respect, it's a part of everyone's life. I think that gets a bit lost in metropolitan Australia.
Do you think they're quite different offerings, metro and regional?
I think there's a better level of communication backwards and forwards in the country between the viewers, the advertisers, and the broadcaster than you see in the cities. And also, you look at the news teams there. I mean, we in Tamworth have something like 12 people in our newsroom. You have two crews every morning. They get on the road at 6:30 in the morning. They're out for up to 6.5 hours collecting story. I mean, they work their butts off. And I think the local community and the local advertisers respect that.
I mean, there is, you talked before about the onus and all the regulations that make you have a certain level of regional news, but it seems like part of that is actually just good business sense as well. I mean, you should do that to service your viewers. You'll engage with them better, therefore, you know, sell more advertising. So it's not just a regulation if you're running a good business, is that right?
Well, I'm not so sure. If you look at the 10 network, the first thing to go has always been news. The metropolitan...
But then you could argue their share reflects that perhaps too, that the audience recognises that...
I think it's been happening longer than when the Canadians had the 10 network. They really chiselled into the news services. So I don't think that's a fair analysis, but it's very important to us because that's the content that we make specifically for those regional audiences. So it's not something we take lightly, and we certainly don't wave it in front of government to say, you know, dare us or dare us not to reduce it. It's simply a matter of common business sense that if we get squeezed, something's got to give. And I regret to say the last thing we'd want to give is the news services. But make no mistake, watch the Win and the Nine affiliation agreement play out, because that's where you may first see it happening.
So what's the next step for Prime? Is it just to continue rallying the government to get changes?
No, Prime, we're focused, our business case is not hanging off solely regulation change. We've got a whole bunch of things that we're doing. We've regenerated the board. We've got a terrific management team, as I said before, and great people out in the field. So we've got a very strong business. We just hope that we can continue to build it in the fashion we have over the past 50 years.
All right.
We're not going to see any tractor convoy head down to Canberra or anything, blockade or anything like that?
No garbage trucks, no. We're not in Struggle Street.
We'll have to leave it there. Chairman of Prime Media Group, John Hartigan, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much, Ingrid.
We do have to take a quick break on Media Week. Coming up next, though, the latest in streaming video on demand as a deal is struck between Quick Flicks and Presto. We'll bring you details next.